Welcome to the first ever audio version of the Aidan Way. This is issue 114 and covers June to August 2024. The Aidan Way is the magazine of the community of Aidan and Hilda, and this one is called Journeying Onwards, the 30th anniversary edition. As we mark 30 years since our community began, we find ourselves in a new stage of growth, with vision for our onward journey rooted in the good soil of all that has brought us to this point. Our regular contributors, each in unique ways, look to the future with both clarity and unity. The call of the wild goose leads us off the beaten track at times, and our destination is unknown to us. But there are times, as now, when we are led out into a broad place where we can look around and see a little more of the path ahead. Reading our guardians and deputy guardians' letters gives us a sense of this broad place with widening views. It's a time for thanksgiving and celebration. Also in this issue, we begin a new series called EDI Voices. Read on to find out more. Whilst on the subject of EDI, we've decided not to continue using this dyslexia font, but are taking other measures which we hope will make a more inclusive reading experience for most people. The main version will use more widely spaced lines with an off-white background. The text-only version will be optimized for screen readers and have a white background. We're also trialing an audio version, either as a standalone listening experience or to be listened to alongside viewing the visually rich main version. Thank you to all those who completed the Aidan Way survey. We've received some very rich data. I'll be in touch with many of you in the coming months to follow up your thoughts and ideas. The submissions deadline for the September issue is the 24th of July. The theme will be Celtic Saints and Prayer, but please remember that you can submit items on any theme. Now a verse from Psalm 18, verse 19. He brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. Some members' news. New Voyagers are Margaret Hunter, Jill Wilson, and Sue Oliver. New Explorers are Anne O'Shaughnessy, Alexander Dowsey, Elaine Simper, David Clark, Philip Benton, Anita Sturt, Rock Sturt, Stephen Aitken, Barry Sendall, Anne Curry, Stuart Aitken, Ron Rurl. And no longer exploring with us, Rosemary Blako, Henny Hare, Caroline Lauer, Ellie Hobson, and Marie Greenway. David Davis, explorer in Norwich, has died. We hold his wife Carolyn and all his loved ones in prayer. And new friends are Jill Hume and Jenny Robinson. Some dates for your diaries. The Hildertide retreat, which will be on the subject of wisdom and creativity, will take place on the 14th to the 18th of November this year and will be led by Nigel Cameron and Julie Cameron Hall. It will be at St Hilda's Priory, Whitby. Booking details will follow in late June. And the Voyagers Gathering, the 20th to the 23rd of January 2025, will be at Scargill House again, and booking details are to follow. And now the Guardian letter by Penny Warren. Dear ones, we celebrate 30 years. What an incredible privilege it has been to have been a part of this community for 20 of those years. We're looking forward rather than back in this Aidan way. At the moment, we see growth in numbers and growth in diversity of membership, and there is new leadership emerging. In the midst of growth, we must be careful and vigilant. Thomas Merton said in Disputed Questions, "The business of success in today's competitive world leaves little room for compassion." Our success-driven world is harsh. It belittles people and destroys the planet. What does spirit-led success look like? I was asked recently about how I saw my role within a community that is growing, and I knew straight away that my role is to nurture our rootedness. The flourishing is wonderful, and may we see the church restored to her mission. May we see healing of fragmented people and places. May we even see the land lit up by the glorious Trinity. May there be people called to pioneer new things in new places. May there be people who become free to hear the Spirit's call to live simply and by a way of life in the company of a soul friend. May we bring healing to a church that is physically on its knees, but which has forgotten how to pray there. And we do see all of that happening. If we nurture our roots, the hidden source of life, we will flourish. To flourish doesn't mean to get big, but to fulfill the calling of the one who is love, and to be more able to give ourselves in love to others. And we shall see still more the healing of fragmented people and places, the church being restored to her mission, and lands being lit by the glorious Trinity. 2 years ago, I had a picture of our community as a huge tree, one that is giving life in so many forms to creatures, birds, plants, insects, microbes, fungi, microscopic fungal communication systems. But none of this can happen without roots. It is our roots that give us growth. It is our roots that make us into who we are. And our roots are the call, as every one of us who has taken the first voyage of the coracle knows. To live out our way of life in the place where we are. To have a rhythm of prayer in place where we are. To live simply and to walk alongside a soul friend. To nurture our roots is to seek out the way of life that is just right for us. To work diligently at stopping for prayer, at always being open to learn, at being accountable to a soul friend, and humble enough to listen to them. To nurture our roots is to learn to discern what is and is not the Spirit's voice. These are lifetime things, but we see their value as our community grows and as more people seek our way of life. May those who already live this way of life bear still more fruit of blessing to the world. May those who are discerning whether this way of life is for them hear the Spirit's voice. And may we give Christ to the world through our words, through our thinking and praying, and through our loving action. With love, Penny. Simon Reed's Guardian's Letter. The community of Aidan and Hilda was launched on both sides of the Atlantic in 1994. I didn't get into the boat until 2002, but it's been an extraordinary journey ever since. 30 years on, we find ourselves sailing in an increasingly turbulent seas, involved in what is not only a continuing voyage of exploration, but also increasingly in being a lifeboat for survivors from the wreck of Christendom. It was all so different in 1994. I was part of the creative alt worship scene, inspired by Sheffield's 9 o'clock service, before we knew about the corruption at its core, and Glasgow's late service, and trying to use contemporary music, art, and technology fused with ancient liturgy and ritual to create spiritual spaces for young people. At the same time, we were marching for Jesus, claiming our cities for Christ, and praying for revival. Along the way, various of us were stumbling over Celtic spirituality and finding something with roots and resonance which reached beneath the postmodern surface. Something was happening, and out of that creative turbulence emerged the community of Aidan and Hilda. 30 years on, we're in a very different place. Revival, whatever that means, has not happened. Most of our mainstream Christian bodies continue to struggle and decline, whilst at the same time our society and culture becomes more and more post-Christian and non-Christian. Yet, astonishingly, amid all this, the community of Aidan and Hilda has grown and continues to grow. What on earth and in heaven is going on? A long time ago, at the beginning of my Celtic journey, and before I even knew the community existed, I remember being on a tour boat which had gone out from Oban over to Staffa and was heading towards Iona. I knew this was a special place, but was not sure what to expect. As the sun glittered on the waves, a pretty unusual day in Scotland, and the abbey came into sight, I sensed God saying that the past is the quarry from which we build the future. I believe that fuses completely with the original vision of the community of Aidan and Hilda, to research the first expressions of Celtic Christian spirituality in order to restore a Christian spirituality which enables people to connect more deeply with God and to connect God with the whole of life, healing people, communities, and creation. As I look ahead to what the future holds, I can't say that I've been to the mountain and come down with the word of the Lord for the journey ahead, but many of you are probably here because you are sick of people who claim that. What I can do is look around at what I have seen and continue to see, because I think that gives a good indication of what we're going to see. It's easy to romanticize the Celtic saints and the church of their day and to forget that they lived in a world which is just as brutal as ours, full of tough choices and tough challenges which required tough people. Yet God was doing something very special in those early centuries, which, both in reality and in the ideal which it created, continues to attract people. I'm constantly amazed that whenever we go to speak in different places around the country and around the world, we always find packed rooms and attentive seekers. So many of the present day expressions of church are sinking, foundering on the rocks of financial needs, fundamentalist sectarianism, crises of integrity, ministerial breakdowns, and congregational disintegration. Amid these conflicting tides, a way of life, a rhythm of prayer, and a soul friend provide solid anchors, and people are taking hold of them. Add to that a body of people committed to simplicity, purity, and obedience, with a culture of listening to God and to each other, and you have something which, consciously or unconsciously, many people are seeking. As the philosopher Alistair MacIntyre wrote 43 years ago, we are in the new dark ages. But then, as now, it is a new monastic spirituality which builds what he called the communities of civility, which will shape a better future. That's what we're part of. Is that enough of a vision to be going on with? Scott Brennan's Guardian's letter. Many years ago, I sat for the first time in Ray Simpson's living room in Starbank Cottage on Holy Island, wondering about this new monastic way of life. I'd been invited to meet Ray through my friend Andrew Dick, a local Church of Scotland minister in Musselburgh. I was planning a new church in town, and Andrew saw what we were trying to do. He recognized it as a pioneering group of Christ followers similar to the early Celtic saints, although I was not familiar with the language of villages of God. Andrew had told me, "I think you will connect with Ray. He's an interesting fellow." My first impression of Ray was someone with a twinkle in his eye and a keen sense of humour. He had a sharp mind and a prophetic edge. He spoke the language of ancient future, and this immediately captured my attention. Here was a man who was more than a theologian, more than a theorist. He was a practitioner who had planted in Bowthorpe, but was now functioning as a storyteller, an author, and voice to culture, reminding us of our roots and our reason for existence. I was intrigued and wanted to know more. Little did I know the journey God would take me on, till I find myself today accepting my new role as one of the guardians of the community of Aidan and Hilda. I'm not the best traveller. I like being at home in familiar settings. Despite this, I've travelled to many places, including North and South America and all over Europe. But my preference is to be where I belong. Yet God has chosen to take me on an incredible inner journey through the landscape of the soul. When I first met Ray, I was drawn to his own story of discovery of saints and soil. He was one of the first people I even heard mention soul friendship and the uncovering of the shadow side. In my head, I knew this was a journey I wanted to take, but my heart was less willing. I was still overconfident in my own ability and vision, which is common among young men who are church planters. They believe in their calling and the product we call contemporary church. I was driven to share the good news in a way that made sense of a post-Christian culture. But I didn't appreciate the kind of deep roots needed to stay steady in the storms to come. I now appreciate the new and the old. Those deep roots came to me in the shape of Ray as a soul friend and in becoming an explorer in the community of Aidan and Hilda. It was a lifeline in the times of raising a family, growing a church, and responding to the demands of a busy life. I spent a long time as an explorer because I had to learn the failures of self-sufficiency. That came in the form of burnout and second-guessing myself, wondering if I really was called to leadership. Throughout it all, God was kind and gave me grace. I'm very grateful for being led to understand the gift of limits. When Faith and I moved to Holy Island, it felt like a new beginning after 20 years of church leadership. I didn't have an agenda other than to follow the call of the Spirit. It was wonderful to walk in the footsteps of the Celtic saints and go deeper into their lives and ministry. I didn't know where this next season would take me, but I was excited about the potential. It wasn't long before many people, particularly burned out leaders, began to visit, looking for a countercultural way of life. I had walked where they walked. I had experienced the loss of identity and refound myself according to much healthier principles and practices. This drew many to explore the Aidan way of mission and discover a trellis that enables fruitfulness and sustainability. Now I find myself as a guardian. In some ways, I'm a reluctant leader. I understand the cost and the conflict. Leadership comes with stresses on time, on relationships, and on priorities. Yet it feels right. It's part of the trajectory of the Spirit's leading. If I feel like a round peg in a round hole, I feel at home. I'm sure I will get things wrong. My style will not suit everyone. But that's the beauty of shared leadership, a team of three. I'm excited about where God is moving and how this will influence the community. It's a new season for me and for all of us who are moving together in this way of life. Thanks for inviting me. Deputy Guardian's letter from Thenu. 15 years ago, walking down the road with my young children amidst the ordinary rhythm of life, I felt a stirring within. A whisper from the Spirit foretold of an impending revival. Whilst initially I was bewildered, that sense has since blossomed within me, evolving into a deep conviction. This revival, I believe, transcends the confines of traditional church settings and indeed Christianity. It heralds an awakening to divine love, a departure from the confines of ego-driven consumerism and the trappings of self-serving desires, instead embracing a path of compassion, social justice, and collective well-being. It will transcend the narrow confines of individualistic pursuits, inviting us to consider the greater good of humanity as a whole. I see its gentle beginnings, which brings me a sense of hope amidst the desperate place our planet finds itself in with climate change. This gives me faith that while complete reversal may be too ambitious, there is a collective impetus emerging which brings determination to confront and address the pressing issues at hand. However, I'm acutely aware that the path to this awakening may not lead through the doors of conventional Christianity. Church is an alien culture for many, and sadly for many people, an awakening to Christ consciousness may not be recognized as Christianity because the church isn't always seen as a place of love, connection, and acceptance. CA&H holds a precious treasure, a way of life which provides both a sturdy framework for those embarking on this journey and room for expansion and continued growth. In a world in which spirituality often stands separate from religion, we need a rootedness in tradition. It is through wrestling with these age-old truths that true growth emerges. While the spiritual landscape may offer a plethora of enticing philosophies, without rootedness they risk becoming mere fragments, a spiritual buffet devoid of sustenance. I believe we will see a rise in those drawn to CA&H who have no background in Christianity and no desire to attend church. If we are to meet the needs of these spiritual seekers, there will be a greater need for soul friendship to offer a strong mentoring component. Perhaps we will need to establish a Christian basics course. Whereas Igniting the Flame is tailored to more seasoned believers, a more foundational course could guide and nourish newcomers with no background in Christianity. Our 30th anniversary as a new monastic community is a testament to our journey so far being built on a solid foundation. We honour our roots while embracing the need to adapt and innovate. We need to keep partnering with Spirit to pioneer creative approaches to meeting the challenges of engagement with the changing world around us. We'll be reaching new demographics and nurturing growth by fostering rootedness in Christ-centered living. Explorer's Guides Letter by Richard Adams. Fear and Relief. As many Aidan Way readers will know, we run regular online discussions for explorers about way of life issues and anything else they wish to bring. Many themes are brought and discussed, and explorers always enrich each other through sharing experiences and ideas. But there's one thing that is hardly ever raised as a starting point, but which frequently seeps out at the edges: fear. People are afraid of many things. But what I hear below the surface of many of our discussions is fear that we're not being Christian enough. Often we hear explorers apologizing for things like struggling to stay focused in prayer, not talking about their faith with colleagues or neighbors, using methods of prayer that don't look exactly like the community prayer book. Underlying these concerns is nearly always a sense of guilt that they aren't following some kind of proper script for the Christian life. It's certainly essential that we keep ourselves under review. Walking with a soul friend is central to that, so that we see where we are growing in Christ and also where we need to develop in fresh ways. But it's not so helpful if we're walking in fear of not conforming to some imagined model of being a good Christian. We're called to follow a risen Christ, not a script. Historically, some branches of the church have taught their members to work to a program or pattern, maybe an evangelistic script or a moral code, such as not drinking or wearing trendy clothes. I kid you not. Rules and scripts can appear to be sound enough at the time, but actually stop people thinking for themselves, taking risks, and trusting the leading of the Spirit. Paul warns about them in Romans 14 and Colossians 2, verses 20 and following. The relief of fear very often comes in the sharing of stories. Many times in these online sessions, I have heard the tension and fear ebb away from people as they listen to someone saying something like, "I didn't dare to witness to my neighbor for years, I just prayed." Or, "I spend my time listening to other dog walkers talking about their worries, and I wonder if I ought to say more about my faith." Even before anyone responds, I can hear the thoughts, "Me too." And then we're open to others' experiences, which can give us new insights and lead us to try fresh ways of living in scenarios that previously paralyzed us with guilt. Time and again, I hear explorers being genuine in their relationships with people at work and in their community, and yet at the same time being apologetic for not conforming to some imaginary style of Christian. But two things make me want to cheer. First, that they're often living authentically as led by the Holy Spirit. And second, the almost audible sigh of relief that I hear as stories are shared and recognized as mine too. That release from fear of failure leads us to renewed imagination and courage. As we all, voyagers and explorers alike, take risks in trying to live more closely to the Spirit's call, we can easily experience fear that we're getting it wrong. Talking to each other not only makes us accountable, but lifts our spirits and calms our fears, which almost always leads to an increase in courage, followed by stepping out in new ways. Living under guilt shrinks our courage, but relief opens us up to take risks. I can almost hear a heavenly yes when someone tentatively shares a story and discovers that maybe they're not off track, but are beginning to fly with the wild goose. Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator letter by Ursula Pentelow. In mid-April, my husband and I visited some woods not too far from where we live that are famed for their bluebells in spring. The colours this year seem especially intense, with great swaths of purpley blue amongst vivid greenery, and the scent of them was lovely. As we walked through the woods, we noticed that alongside all the abundant new growth were some recently fallen trunks. Some had blocked established paths, and the beginning of new paths could be seen. Those fallen trees might have died, but they continue to nourish the life of the woods in many ways. We've visited these woods at different times of year, and they're always beautiful in different ways. This got me thinking about the interplay between the familiar and the new. Our community's way of life provides stability, both for individuals and for our collective identity. Those 10 waymarks are like familiar paths. So, however much we as a community change and grow in new directions, there will be that constant familiarity to ground us. Just like the fallen trees nourishing new life in the woods, so new life, new direction is nourished and supported by what went before. In the few years since I took my first voyage, it feels like much has changed. The pandemic encouraged us to put more things online, and online meetings are now an established part of community life, enabling people to come together regularly and often. Numerically, the community is growing, with new voyagers and new explorers joining. The Igniting the Flame course continues to develop under Jane Franklin's leadership, with regular online meetings, as well as, this spring, 3 workshops in person. There are many online gatherings now that were not in place just 3 or 4 years ago. The All at Sea's craft gathering, some Passing the Harp events, more meetings with the US community, and several regional groups meeting to share prayer times weekly, to name just some. Also, a number of people have taken on new roles in the last 2 or 3 years. The EDI role has developed since Thanu started in the role a few years back, and we're developing a more coordinated approach to provision for special needs at in-person gatherings. We cannot know all that God has in store for us, but I'm so grateful to belong to a community that is called to go where the Spirit goes. Let's embrace new paths with gratitude for all that has gone before. As our community grows, more voices are being brought to the table. In this issue of the Aidan Way, we're starting a new column called EDI Voices. Each issue will feature a different person sharing about themselves, so that we can learn not only more about each other, but also how, as a community, we need to become more accessible and more inclusive. Unless we know about the barriers some people face, we cannot help dismantle them. Kicking off for us this issue is Becky Farrell. Becky says, I've been asked to kick this series off with the topic of print disability, which for me is part of being visually impaired. I can read. However, one of my eye conditions is nystagmus, meaning that my eyes struggle to focus. An optometrist described it as like trying to shoot at a target, but only hitting it 1 in 10 times. My eye, I only have one eye that is focal, sends my brain, say, 100 images, and my brain strings together the 10 in-focus images and disregards the rest. This makes finding focus slow. My reading speed is about 1/4 to 1/3 the speed of average readers, and it's hard for me to track from the end of one line to the beginning of the next. If I look away from the writing, it takes me time to refocus. I struggle to read flat words such as, so, and cocoa, and all numbers other than 1, 4, and 7, and the difference between M and N. When I read, I often get eye strain and a headache, which only goes with sleep. Painkillers can't shift it. As well as print, focusing on blue stroke white light causes me instant pain. My sight is made worse by stress. Other consequences of my two eyes not working together are a shallow depth of field and difficulty judging speed, slope, and distance. I can't tell how fast a car is moving towards me. I can see a slope, but I can't judge how steep it is, so I don't know what's under my feet. I don't see bumps in the pavement, and I need shadows to tell me how objects are related spatially. Days with solid grey skies and no shadows make it hard for me to see where things are. I also have a short focal length, so my eyesight isn't as bad looking at things a couple of inches from my nose, but becomes less detailed as I try to see things further away. When I start getting emails from people refusing to read the dyslexia font, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, as an editor, I want to make a good reading experience for as many people as possible. On the other hand, I felt that people could try harder to read something that benefits people for whom all reading is a struggle. I felt that it could be a small sign of solidarity to bear with it for the sake of others. It brought to mind Ash Barker's assertion that compassion can be inconvenient. In order to put this magazine together, I experienced the physical pain of eye strain and headaches many days in a row, 4 times a year. As with everything, I make a judgment about how much pain a reading task is worth to me. There are things I choose not to read as they take too long at my slow reading speed and cause me pain. I judge editing this magazine as a good trade-off for a significant amount of pain because it coheres with my mission. I do as much reading as I can by audio, but I can't edit by audio as it won't show me the double spaces and placement of wrong words or grammar. It won't help me to source, edit, and place all the images. Having said all this, I consider visual impairment to be a minor disability, even though I'm severely sight impaired, registered blind in old coinage. I also have functional neurological disorder, or FND, and bipolar disorder, and the latter makes visual impairment feel like a walk in the park. FND is a stress-related neurological condition that causes inflammations and nerve pain, and can cause uncontrollable movement of my limbs for hours at a time. Bipolar disorder is also stress-related, so when my stress levels rise, I experienced mental illness as well as greater sight loss, headaches, inflammation, and nerve pain. Bipolar disorder was ranked as the sixth most disabling disease by the World Health Organization. While I don't have the lengthy periods of both health and illness that are characteristic of some people with bipolar, my episodes are frequent. This makes it difficult to plan because I don't know how I'll be in a few weeks' time. Bipolar depression tends to be severe, and the highs are devastating, causing great heartache and chaos. My episodes tend to last between a few weeks and 6 months, but can be shorter or longer, and I'm well for an average of 3 months between episodes. At the extremes, I also experience psychosis, hearing voices, seeing and experiencing things no one else can, extreme fear of people and places, and so on. I've found that there's a hierarchy of disability. Everyone wants to help a blind person, but people avoid me when I'm mentally distressed. People offer me accessible seating on the tram when they see my white stick, but no one offers me a seat when I'm beyond exhausted due to depression. I'm not sure why this is, because being blind doesn't affect my ability to stand up, but depression does. I'm not sure why being blind is considered more difficult to live with than bipolar disorder. With bipolar, I experience weeks or months of severe depression where turning over in bed needs a half-hour build-up and saying a sentence takes too much energy. The highs make me unrecognizable to myself, leading me to overspend, lose my friends, put myself in dangerous situations, and make me suicidal, along with terrifying psychosis. If I was offered a choice between perfect sight and perfect mental health, I'd stay blind. It's a no-brainer. One of the most important things I've learned is the importance of joy. Every moment of well-being, every task I can accomplish with my eyes closed, literally, is an occasion for joy. These are such precious moments because I don't have to weigh the pain or mental health implications against the benefits of the activity. If you read this article swiftly and without pain, rejoice. Pain-free reading is such a gift. If you feel low in mood but can eat, drink, get showered and dressed and go outside, rejoice. Your life isn't easy, but it's possible. There's so much life to be lived, so much joy to share. It may be that we can't experience fullness of joy until we've experienced great sadness and come through. So rejoice also for the hard times, because they are the shadows that show us more clearly the sunlight. The World's Native Peoples and the Celtic Tribes by Ray Simpson. On St. Patrick's Day 2024, I spoke by Zoom to a gathering of USA native pastors, sponsored by Tribal Winds. This article reflects my talk and conversations. Before there was Christianity, there was Jesus, who said, "I am the way." His disciples were indigenous fisherfolk. After several generations, the mindset of empire seeped into the organized activities of these Christians, who developed Roman-type administrative areas called dioceses, with a hierarchy appointed centrally. However, there were lands on the fringes of that empire, like Ireland, where the good news of Jesus was assimilated into indigenous patterns. Patrick, who was a nominal British Christian teenager around 400 AD, was captured by pagan Irish pirates and forced to work as a slave by a farmer named Milchu in the north of Ireland. The Irish were pagans. Patrick turned to Christ with all his heart. In his personal testimony, called his confession, he reveals that he prayed more than 100 times each day and each night. These prayers warmed his heart on the cold nights. After 6 years, the Great Spirit told him to escape. He was to walk along the coast until he saw a boat ready to journey to Gaul, today's France. He met Christian leaders in Gaul and trained as a priest in the Christian church, which by then had dioceses and bishops influenced by the hierarchies of the Roman Empire. Patrick returned to his parents in Britain, who wanted him to have a cosy ministry nearby. But in a dream, the Irish people wrote him a letter saying, "Come and live among us again." So he left home comforts and laboured among the Irish. Because he had worked among them as a slave, they welcomed him as an adopted son, one of their own. They took him to their hearts, and Patrick knew their ways. Patrick took a team with him. The first thing they did was to sail down the river and ask a farm owner for hospitality. The pagan farmer had natural goodness, and when he looked into Patrick's face, he recognized goodness in it. They became such friends that the farmer invited Patrick to say a blessing over the whole of the tribal area. This has come down to us as the blessing of Munster, to befriend and baptize all who worked on the large estate. So friendship and acceptance of indigenous hospitality were the two keys that Patrick initially turned. However, after this, Patrick challenged Ireland's High King, the Big Chief, to transfer his allegiance from the sun in the sky to the uncreated Son of Suns, Jesus. On the day the High King lit a fire on the hill of Tara to entice the sun god to give them sun-soaked crops, Patrick lit a fire on the hill opposite to celebrate the rising from death of Jesus, the Son of Suns. The High King sent warriors to arrest Patrick and his team, but they chanted psalms. A mist descended, and the warriors saw only deer running downhill. The locals thought the Christians were better shamans than their own. A third key was new revelation linked to enculturation. Instead of rubbishing the indigenous regard for the sun, Patrick transformed it. He called Christ the true sun, whose rays beamed into their hearts and lives. They could continue to pray by walking sunwise in a circle, but now they prayed to the true sun. They prayed when the sun arose and when it set, in the rhythm of the sun. Dakota medicine man Black Elk said, "Everything the Indian does is in a circle." So modern Celtic style circling prayers, for example, circle us, Lord, keep good within, keep harm without, harmonize with this tradition. A fourth key was to use the Irish love of sayings about three things to teach the doctrine of the Trinity. An indigenous wild plant was the shamrock, which has 3 leaves on one stem. Later legend says that Patrick took the shamrock, pointed that it was 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, and explained that the God above all gods was Creator, Redeemer, and Spirit, ever one and ever three. Blessed Holy Trinity. Look up songs about the Trinity from the Irish singer Sammy Horner, who is well known in the USA. Blessed Trinity on youtube.com. Patrick teaches Westerners, if we want to win an indigenous people to Christ, we have to know and feel what it's like to be dispossessed. We have to learn to cry out to a merciful Saviour from a place of destitution. And we have to learn empathy for the people among whom we labour. Patrick brought a model of church from France which didn't fit, trying to establish dioceses with imported bishops. But because he and his helpers were open to the spirit of the indigenous people, within a few generations, churches had morphed into tribal churches. Now chieftains gave prime land for monastic villages of God and appointed one of their people as their spiritual father or abbot. The bishops still confirmed and ordained people, but they lived as part of the tribal church under the leadership of the abbot. Research reveals that each church was distinctive. It doubtless reflected the ethos of the tribe. The heartbeat was the place of prayer. They did farming, fishing, milling, cooking, and many fed large numbers each day. They taught people to read and established schools, libraries, and guest houses. Some became the health center for the tribe, the holy place for burial, a sanctuary for refugees. The bards preserved the tribal memory. At the heart were cells where monks maintained daily prayer in the rhythms of the sun. Monks were often celibates, but some monastic villages also had the maneg, where married monks lived. Sometimes the tribal elders asked these villages of God to oversee crime prevention. They adapted what we now call penitentials, spiritual disciplines to replace the 8 deadly sins with their opposite virtues, into what we now call restitutional justice. I had snatches of conversation with the indigenous pastors. Few live in native reservations, but some are sponsored by a white evangelical capitalist. Capitalists want a return for their money, so they expect the pastor to develop a big church. One pastor wondered whether capitalism is the problem. If the capitalist sponsor wants Native American pastors to adopt the ways of white evangelical pastors, they lose the reason for their calling. But such a pastor could be used by God to redeem capitalism. For example, why not start a church which rejects bigger is better spirituality and adopts 2 features of much indigenous spirituality? Firstly, harmonize the work of the church with the transformation of the neighborhood in which the meetings take place. Secondly, harmonize the spirituality of the church so that worshippers bring harmony between God and creation. I recommend my book, Brendan's Return Voyage, A New American Dream, Indigenous, Postcolonial, and Celtic Theology, published by Wipf and Stock, for those who want to explore this further. St. Cuthbert's Way Churches Together on St. Cuthbert's Day by Heather Martin. Many years ago, or so it seems, the Scottish Regional Group met with Dr. Chris Bowles, a former archaeology officer for the Scottish Borders Council, for a walk and talk around the old Melrose site. This year there was an invitation from St. Cuthbert's Way Churches Together to meet at the Tea Room Stedding at Old Melrose on the afternoon of the 20th of March 2024, St. Cuthbert's Day. Our group was led by the Reverend Colin Johnston and the Reverend Rosie Frew, and the historical and archaeological details were presented by Dr. Margaret Collin of the Trimontium Trust. The current owners of the land have changed the public access to the estate slightly since I was last there, but they had given permission for our group to go into some of the private areas. Some of the archaeological evidence has now been updated and will be different from what we knew from our previous visit. Nowadays, there is nothing of the old monastery to see on the ground, thanks in part to Kenneth MacAlpine, who razed the original buildings to the ground a few centuries back. However, Old Melrose continued to be a place of pilgrimage and home to a few or single monks, who stayed to dedicate themselves to serving Christ and to offer hospitality to travellers who came to the site, up until the time of the Reformation. After that, the land was sold off and became a privately owned estate. Dr. Margaret Collins showed images from the LiDAR survey carried out by the Scottish Government. This technology removes the tree and large vegetation from the image of the aerial view. From that image of the loop, the course of the vallum could be seen more clearly. The archaeologists realized they had located the vallum in the wrong place, as is the current info board. Now, from the image, they could see this great ditch went from one side of the neck of the loop to the other, and its exact location. This ditch may well have existed in pre-Roman times, and the loop was already a site of worship. The Romans took it over, and the archaeologists hoped to find evidence of this in the future. Dr. Collin also showed how the monks' cells and the chapel may have looked on the site in Cuthbert's time. The images are based on the buildings reconstructed and can be seen at Jarrow. As we listened to the archaeological details, we also listened to reflections and joined in prayer, not just looking back to the past, but praying for those of us who have benefited from the faithfulness of Cuthbert and other saints of this area. As we spent a time in the walled garden, we were reminded of the many anonymous and faithful monks who prayed and served in that place. We might even have been standing on some of their bones there, as it's understood that this area was part of the monastery graveyard. Though many bones were removed when the garden was formed in the 19th century. I've included the reflection read by the Reverend Rosie Frew, with permission, which reminds us that we're all part of God's building work, however anonymous or well known, and we are all important in God's kingdom. The wall surrounding the garden is made up of many reclaimed and repurposed stones. One at least has been identified as originally part of a Roman wall, and some may have come from early medieval buildings. I wonder, as you read through the reflection, what sort of stone you might be. May you know that you are important just as you are, while also being shaped by God to be part of his building work for now and in the future kingdom. Stones by Tom Gordon. God, there are big stones in these walls, solid, dependable stones, heaved into place by skilled masons, holding these walls in place for centuries. Thank you for these big stones, for their strength and purpose, and for their enduring ability to make this place what it needs to be. God, there are little stones in these walls, fitted in, banged into place, to fill the gaps, to bind with other stones, to make these walls complete. Misshapen stones, all with an appropriate space for their shape alone. Once discarded stones, discarded no longer. Odd stones, each one with its special place. Thank you for the little stones, for their unobtrusive necessary part, strengthening these walls, making this place what it needs to be. God of our lives, thank you for the big people in our churches, in our communities, in our world, carrying responsibilities, carved out for important roles, people we rely on, people who are our role models, people we trust, people who make our lives, our church, our world worthwhile. God of our lives, help the big people to hang in there because we need them so much to keep the whole thing going, making our world what it needs to be. And if I'm one of those big stones, help me not to crumble with the weight of it all. God of our lives, help us not to forget the little people, those seemingly insignificant, misshapen people, the ones who don't get much thought or much recognition. who are often rejected as being useless, the shy people, the different people, the gentle people, the low self-esteem people, the diffident people, the not so sure I'm really any good people. Fit them into your walls to make the church, our communities, our world, what they were really meant to be. And help us to see that without them, churches crumble, communities perish, the walls of our world fall down. God of our lives, hooray for the little people. 3 cheers for the little stones. Thank God they are there. And if I'm a misshapen, ordinary stone, minding my own business, just doing my bit of filling my place in the wall, just being me, thank you for putting me here. Thank you for believing in me and building me into your walls. Amen. Developing Houses of Prayer by Simon Reed. Over the last 5 years, ever since the 25th anniversary of the community, we've been thinking and praying over future directions in which God may take us. One of these potential pathways has been the expansion of community houses of one kind or another. In the past, we have thought of community houses as being households which embody the way of life and which offer hospitality. In recent times, we have spoken more about houses of prayer, and a number of people have expressed an interest in this. So, what is a house of prayer? Our community handbook gives 3 examples. 1. Prayer rooms where there is a place in a voyager's home or garden where daily prayer rhythms are followed and which visitors are welcome to join. When designated as such, details of the prayer times should be made known. 2. Intercession hubs, where a voyager and or members of their household has a particular call to intercessory prayer. Their home or part of it may be designated as a place to which requests for prayer may be brought or delivered. Prayer may be offered with people present if suitable safeguarding measures are in place. The means of making prayer requests should be made known. 3. Solitary prayer places where a voyager has, with their sole friend and the community guardian or guardians, discerned a call to solitary or hermit life. Their home may be a place where prayer requests may be deposited. The means of making requests should be made known. So, houses of prayer can take many different forms. And Ray Simpson's book, Houses of Prayer, What They Are, Where to Find Them, and How to Start One, Stowmarket, Kevin Mayhew Limited, 2015, is a good resource. It may be that where you live is already a house of prayer, or that you would really like to develop one. Our handbook sets out the process for doing this in a way where you can be supported, resourced, and express this part of our way of life safely. The Guardians and CAIM want to encourage anyone interested either in having their place recognised as a community house of prayer or in starting to develop one to get in touch. We sense that God may be stirring something. Please let the Guardians know if you think you might be part of this. Worship in a Cold Church by Richard Adams. The first Sunday in February was cold. Knowing our church wasn't well heated, I put on a few layers and headed out. When I got there, the radiators were off and the overhead heaters were off. It wasn't just cold, it was unprintably freezing. But I knew that the warden would put on the overheads when the service began, so I huddled into a pew and organised myself into an attitude of prayer before my brain froze solid. The service began. A spirit-lifting hymn, as I recall, but where were the overhead heaters? Time moved on. I got colder. The heaters didn't come on. The usual last resort was for me to go and switch them on myself, but I was by then hemmed in with other worshippers. I was just getting my focus back when the next hymn began, and it was one of those with a type of tune beloved of Welsh composers, set in a minor key with notes that go in the opposite directions from your expectations. And nobody else seemed to know it either. At this point, I was reminded of my frequent assertions that worship isn't a consumer event, you know. We're not here to pick our favourite stuff off a menu. During my time as a parish priest, I was frequently approached by people not liking various aspects of services, and my efforts to curate worship that offered both familiarity and challenge weren't always appreciated. This didn't trouble me, as I always wanted to help people to see beyond their personal preferences. This brings me back to a freezing Sunday in North Wales and an awkward conversation with myself. So, it's cold and the hymn is unsingable. What's your problem? You're here to worship God, not sit by a nice fire and sing all your favourite songs. Get over yourself. But I'm so cold and I hate that hymn. Looks like I needed to do some serious thinking. The situation I've described mirrors many that occur in the Christian community. How do we prepare and lead worship that will draw people deeper into God, but will also work for a wide range of people with their differing histories, preferences, etc.? It helps to get back to our sources and have a look at the Bible's Hebrew and Greek words, which we translate as worship. And it turns out that there are quite a few. So it's clearly not a simple translation from one single word to an English equivalent. Here are the most common from the Old and New Testaments. Hebrew shachar, meaning bow down, prostrate, pay homage. Abad, meaning serve. Napal, fall. And barak, meaning bless. And then Greek words, proskuneo, to worship, show homage by kneeling or prostration. Latreo, serve. Pipto, fall. Well, once you have a look at these, it gets you a long way from grumbles about temperature and tunes. How can I best pay homage to God, serve the Trinity, and prostrate myself or fall down in adoration when I'm overly concerned about my own comfort? To be fair, a lot of discomfort makes it harder to do these things, but for Christians down the ages, from the desert mothers and fathers through Cuthbert standing in the sea and reciting psalms to my own feeble efforts, it is possible because it's a discipline of the heart, which begins with reminding ourselves what we've come to do. Time after time, I've had to give myself a bit of a talking to about my approach to church worship. And time after time, God, with degrees of patience not known to humanity, has graciously met me with absurd generosity. So, whilst it is important to have conversations with worship leaders about what resources work for different people in different settings, in the end, it's down to you and me. It's on us to come prepared to show homage, fall down, at least mentally if the floor's too dirty, serve, and be a blessing to God. These are the aims we have in every part of life, and we rise to some major challenges outside of church worship, so why not within it? The challenges to heartfelt worship are a microcosm of the daily warfare between what Paul calls flesh and spirit. Igniting the Flame, Tutors Needed for 2025 by Jane Franklin. Igniting the Flame continues to draw a lot of interest from explorers, friends, and others interested in our way of life. We have 20 people on the waiting list already, and in previous years we've had people asking to join the course right up to the end of the year. We're limited in the number of students we can accommodate according to the number of tutors available. Is this something you feel you may be called to do to help support the community? Tutors are voyagers who are living out a way of life and would like to walk alongside someone who is looking to go deeper in their walk with God. You don't have to have done the course yourself, but may find it interesting to go through it with a student and review various aspects of the waymarks for yourself. Previous students who are now voyagers are encouraged to become tutors themselves. To find out more, please contact me at the following email address: janebfranklin@outlook.com. A Celtic Pilgrimage to Thinnist in 3 parts. Derek Barrett. Julie Barrett says, Derek is not at all accustomed to writing poetry. The artwork came first, immediately following and in response to a walk across the Pilgrim Posts to Holy Island as part of the ITF retreat on the 5th of October 2023. Then God invited him to write a poem, and we were all truly amazed and moved by it after he read out the first part that evening. By the following Monday, the 8th of October, he had it all down on paper. And here it is. Beginnings. A cold, wind-swept, barren landscape awaits. But troubled mind, beset with uncertainty and doubt, abides within. A soul longing for freedom from self, from all that weighs him down. But a mind hesitant to trust and simply believe. Like a deer panting for water, wanting to step out from cover. Afraid of being exposed, of what might lie ahead. But now, no more hesitation, no more finding excuses. For in this moment, a new resolve is made. To step out and leave all fear and uncertainty behind. To walk that path that many saints have trodden. To be exposed to that wild remoteness and the howling gale, where the only thing that's certain, nothing can be the same again. Now I am committed. There's no turning round, except to look back to the mainland and surrender to the Lord. Letting go of my baggage that I've picked up on life's journey, an end to ego and people-pleasing, an end to hopes and dreams and expectations, an end to unhealthy friendships, as well as my unforgiveness, offence, and pride. Now I turn to face those repeating guideposts, marching silently across this barren landscape, bearing silent witness to the saints that have gone before, a timely reminder of my own journey, separated by distance, but in unity with a common goal. The first post on this pilgrimage awaits. Although battered by the many tides, ebbs and flows, and enveloped with crustacea, it still stands straight and proud, a stark reminder against the stormy sky, that God is eternal and is by my side, whether here or on life's long journey, faithful Father and glorious guide. The journey. A deep breath taken, squaring of the shoulders, of determination and firm resolve, to take off the trappings of civilization, to expose my feet to the earth from whence I came, to come in humility before the Almighty, to come without agenda or any selfish thoughts, but simply to experience something of what those others had before, of God Himself within creation, of His love and understanding, of His grace and compassionate nature, of His willingness to forgive, of His hand reaching outward, guiding me safely to His eternal harbour. Hesitancy as my feet sink into the ground. Surely not a new sensation of wet sand engulfing feet, but this is not just any shoreline, nor a gentle stroll along any beach. Instead, a walk with God, my faithful companion, on holy ground, a path well trod, but new every day, taking me further into this remote landscape. My feet explore a new awareness of sand, of mud, of shells and open water, of bog, of weeds and oily water. Thoughts then stray to my own life's journey, of highs and lows, of good times and bad, of many decisions made, of regrets and sadness, of fun and laughter. But most of all, to God's gracious gift of his Son's own life story, of redemption and salvation, of crucifixion and eternal resurrection. As I walk this liminal journey, comprehension slowly dawns that with every step taken, my bondage loosens on old ways of thinking and beliefs tightly held. As trees shed their leaves in autumn, so my burdens gently fall away, lifeless as the empty shells scattered on the sand, awaiting the tide to wash them away as if they never were. The constant wind a wailing, made more eerie by the singing seals, the wild wind battering against me, with sand and sea whipped into frenzies, lashing at my legs, feet, and heels, all trying to blast me off my journey. Then, suddenly, as the constant barrage dulls all my senses, and the vastness of the landscape makes me feel so small, I am unexpectedly drawn deeper into intimacy with my Creator, filled with his perfect peace and stillness as he calms the storms of my life. As I slowly walk this path well trodden, regimented posts are broken by a structure. Silhouetted against the dark and foreboding sky, a refuge standing like a stronghold, defiant against all weathers and the tides. Then the unchanging nature of this shelter reminds me that he is my refuge and my fortress, and my God, in whom I trust. Arrival. As the shoreline comes ever closer, a deep breath taken, and I ponder of what my Heavenly Father's been saying, of carrying needlessly so much baggage, instead of trusting Him who is able to guide me through life's ups and downs. So much weight has been lifted, so much laid at the feet of Jesus, so many hang-ups and disappointments surrendered to the Lord, so much fear and deep depression put to death on his cross. As this journey draws to a close, I step out quicker with rising excitement, of newly birthed hope and anticipation, of newfound realization that God is God of all creation, the great I Am who's always been, my dearest Father and closest friend, who will get me safely to the end. So now I make a firm resolution to become thin like my precious Jesus, brother, Saviour, and Redeemer, picking up all that God has shown me, to be faithfully yoked to my Jesus and go wherever may the Spirit lead. Purity, Simplicity, and Obedience. A Deeper Meaning Emerges by Claire Rogers. The London Igniting the Flame workshop was held in Daphne's welcoming home in Westminster, a short walk from the Thames. Daphne pointed out that in building a way of life based on the 10 waymarks, it's tempting to skip over the 3 overarching principles of purity, simplicity, and obedience. So it was helpful to set aside a day to think about these. In our discussion, we found that at face value, none of these words sound very attractive. It took some chewing over for the real meaning to emerge. Purity. Our knee-jerk understanding of purity was something you can't have if you've had any experience of life or gone through puberty. How can you have lived and still be pure? It smacks of never having sinned or naivety, like white, pristine snow that once touched can't ever be restored to its original whiteness. What emerged in the discussion was a feeling that purity isn't white. It isn't the absence of colour or life or experience. Indeed, it's the redemption of every facet of our lives and histories, like creating a mosaic, turning brown, jumbled pieces into meaningful beauty. Every piece, however broken or sinful we felt it was at the time, can be redeemed by God into something beautiful, becoming part of who we really are. We can be pure in the sense of being unalloyed, freed of influences that are not from our true selves. Perhaps this describes the pure in heart, who, Jesus says, will see God. Matthew 5, verse 8. Simplicity. A life of simplicity felt out of reach and hard to achieve to many of us. For those in busy jobs or ministry or with families or both, how do we live a simple life? There are so many good things we could or should be doing. How do we keep it simple? Our discussion came up with the words undistracted and focused. We talked about doing just enough, not gilding the lily and overcomplicating things. There's no point running a dozen amazing ministries if you're stretched so thin you do all of them badly. An undistracted gaze focuses on the beloved and seeks first the kingdom of God. Matthew 6, verse 33. This means listening for the quiet voice of God among all the competing noise he demands. That may mean a life or ministry that doesn't dazzle from the outside, but just does small things with great love, in the words of Mother Teresa. Obedience. Well, obedience was a word that raised hackles for many of us. It sounds like a life based on rules and fear, doing as you're told without thinking or questioning, never colouring outside the lines. It brought back memories of school for some of us, and not necessarily good ones. In talking it over, someone suggested that to obey God takes courage because it often means stepping outside of our cultural norms or comfort zone, taking risks, or being creative. So it is a way of colouring outside the lines after all. This is also an obedience born of love, not fear. When we think of the one we are obeying, who is love, this is about relationship, not rules. Jesus said, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them." John 14, verse 23. It's hard to think of a better motivation than that. Forthcoming Alex Kingswell exhibition at Coventry Cathedral by Richard Marsden. Readers may be interested to know that community friend Alex Marsden, professionally known as Alexandra Kingswell, will be mounting an exhibition of her artwork in Coventry Cathedral this summer. Many of you are familiar with Alex's work and love the vibrancy of her colours and her striking designs. The exhibition is entitled Seeking the Light and runs from the 1st to the 31st of August, open every day. Coventry Cathedral is a thin place, a prayer-soaked location. An earlier building, dating back 600 years, was destroyed during a bombing raid in 1940. The authorities determined that a new cathedral be built, not out of defiance and revenge, but in a spirit of reconciliation, and as a symbol of the enduring search for peace. The ruins of the former cathedral are preserved alongside the new as a place of prayer and reflection. The new cathedral is full of light and vibrant stained glass, and it's here that Alex's work will be shown in conversation with the famous Piper window. Here are some comments from people who have seen previous exhibitions of her work. A feast for the eyes and the brain. Totally inspiring and exciting. I loved how you used Fibonacci to show an explosion of life. I'm amazed how it all looks so organized yet so random. Beautiful. Legends from Lindisfarne. Diverse and Inclusive Saints by Elizabeth Hopkinson. I wanted to let you know about a book of mine that I will be crowdfunding in May and June. Some of you will have heard me read my retold stories of saints' legends at the various Passing the Harp events that have taken place. I've written 19 of these stories, which are collected in one illustrated book. It's not an official Community of Aidan and Hilda book. It's my personal project and reflects my interests. I know it won't be for everyone, but I wanted to let as many people as possible know about it. Diverse and Inclusive Saints. This book came from an idea from Thainu. The idea is to produce a book similar to my asexual fairy tales books. Illustrated anthologies of retold and new fairy tales with asexual representation, but retelling stories of the Celtic saints. Since Thainu and I have both been active in the field of equality, diversity, and inclusion, I wanted to make this a book of diverse and inclusive saints. So we have a mermaid saint, a trans monk, a non-Euplet warrior, a socially anxious saint, and a Madonna who protects same-sex couples, to name but a few. Most of these come from the tradition of Celtic monasticism and their forebears, the Desert Elders. Although they are largely centered on the Celtic lands, Ireland, Wales, Brittany, etc., they also embrace Lebanon, India, North America, and Brazil. How does this book differ from similar books? Most books of saints' lives that aren't for children are either aimed at Christian believers, focused on the spiritual lessons to be learned from their life, and/or devotion to the saint, or they are focused on the legendary aspects of saints' lives as explored by folklorists, storytellers, etc., and where the stories intersect with Celtic paganism. I wanted my book to do both, because I'm interested in both, and I know there are others who are too. My retellings come from a place of Christian faith and draw on the wider Celtic spirituality and symbolism that will be familiar to neo-pagans. I hope people of all faiths and none can find common ground here. The illustrations are by my daughter Anna. Go to www.annahopkinsonart.com. Crowdfunding. This book will be crowdfunded, which I have used for similar projects. This means that the publication is paid for entirely by the readers. Crowdfunding will run from the 24th of May to the 22nd of June. During this time, you can pledge a variety of amounts, and the link can be found in the digital version. Julian Exhibition Textile Art by Elizabeth Scott. Editor's note. In the March 2024 issue of the Aidan Way, we published Amy Harrison's account of the Julian exhibition in Norwich last year. In this issue, we bring you Elizabeth Scott's account of creating a textile art panel which featured in the exhibition. She says that it was difficult to capture in the photo the translucent quality of her piece, which is created with 2 layers of organza. I'm sure you'll agree, however, that the photo of Elizabeth's image and her account of researching and creating it are a valuable second episode to our coverage of this exhibition. As I began to read about Mother Julian's life and her revelations, it struck me how important our eyes are in both discerning and showing compassion. As God revealed himself to Julian by his Holy Spirit, so she began to see God's amazing love for all he had created and his deep compassion on the brokenness of humankind. Initially, I wanted to know more about Julian as a person, asking, who was this extraordinary woman? Was she Juliana, a high-class woman, or simply a young girl who had a series of near-death experiences? What was it that led her to be an anchoress for such a deep longing for God? And what was her intention in writing down her revelations? I was to discover her mission statement. I thought I was dying. I wanted all and sundry to know and see what I was seeing, to remind them that life is short. I wanted them to love God. It seems to me that loving compassion is, among other things, embracing the darkness, seeing and receiving the pain, hurt, brokenness of another, and responding in a deep, loving, heartfelt way. Surely this is how Jesus views us as he looks upon his broken world. So here, running through the 3 images of Julian, is the cross of Jesus Christ, the one who was central in her life of prayer and her revelations. His love and his eyes of compassion are shown weeping from his wounds on the cross, yet crowned by his crown of thorns, which would ultimately become a crown of glory. It's my hope that this artwork will touch the observer's heart in a way that draws out a real longing to know and experience God's love more deeply for themselves. The Way of Hild Pilgrimage Route by Suzanne Shute. 9 days before Ash Wednesday, I decided that, as part of my Lenten intentions this year, I would walk the Way of St. Hild Pilgrimage Route, praying for the future of my parish. I then invited the people of the parish to pray with me in spirit alongside each footstep I took on this 47-mile pilgrimage route from St. Hilda's Church, Hartlepool, to Whitby Abbey. At this point, I was not sure how I was going to do it, except that I was going to walk the 47 miles in the 40 days of Lent. What started off as a small idea was then circulated around the Whitby Deanery and CA&H via timetables of when and where I would be walking, via clergy, lay members, emails, and Facebook posts, etc. Stage 1 started the day after Ash Wednesday, which felt like perfect timing. Then, over the next 6 weeks, there was a wonderful coming together of the next 5 stages, and a feeling of the people of the deanery and fellow members of CA&H growing closer and deeper together. Stage 6 ended by walking the final 8 miles of the pilgrimage route, followed by a wonderful Thanksgiving service around the prayer station of the Way of St. Hild in St. Mary's Church, Whitby, on the Wednesday in Holy Week. Before and after each stage, I sent out a timetable, posted regular photos and updates, encouraged my fellow pilgrims to join in, and added photographs and comments to a photo album that I had produced and left in my church for people to look through. I would like to take credit for all of the above, but I sensed it was the Holy Spirit's work. I was also walking this pilgrimage walk in thanksgiving for being a voyager. and this further enabled me to be a witness to the deanery about CANH, the Voyager's Cross I wear each day, and my own personal way of life. When I was thinking about doing this pilgrimage route this way, I was not sure if it would have the same impact on me as when I walked the St. Cuthbert's Way last September, which I had walked in one go. But I did know it was a pilgrimage of the heart, something which had greatly impacted on me when I had walked St. Cuthbert's Way. It did impact on me deeply, far more deeply than I expected, because not only had I walked in another great saint's footsteps, I had also had so much more time to visit places, explore places that I never thought I would explore, meet so many people, have so many wonderful conversations, and have much more time to pray and reflect between each stage. It was so life-giving. There is a more detailed PowerPoint on the pilgrimage, which is available on request. I live in Whitby, so St. Hilda, is a very special saint for me, and I feel deeply humbled and privileged to have walked this recent pilgrimage route on behalf of my parish and in thanksgiving for being a voyager. Each stage started off with 4 set prayers at each of the 12 waypoint signs on the route, one of them being the following pilgrimage prayer, which I offer you all with prayers, love, and blessings from Whitby. As we embark upon this pilgrimage together, guide our steps. While we cannot anticipate every twist and turn ahead, we trust that you will lead us and strengthen us, inviting us to discover beauty in ways we cannot imagine. Let us seek your face in paths by the sea, through fields, along roads trod by so many who sought the blessing of your presence. May our fellowship nurture our spirits as we journey along the way of St. Hild and towards your blessed kingdom. Amen. A short message from the Northeast Group from Maureen Simpson. 6 of us met at Ray's house on the 14th of April for prayers, a faith lunch, and discussion. It's lovely to meet together in spite of our large geographic patch. And a message from Ray Simpson about the Celtic Studies Library. After many years and thousands of hours of work, our librarian, Judith Lyne, has retired. Faith Brennan and Janet Bissocks have taken on some of the work. Many, many thanks, Judith. At the end of the magazine, there follows a lot of information about different coordinators and their contact details. I will simply leave you with my contact details, Richard Brassington, the administrator of the community. If you want to contact me, email admin@aidanandhilda.org.uk. Thank you for listening.